and she cut her leg on a tree stump. And I came running over, and she was like upset, annoyed, a little bit teary, but I thought nothing serious of it. And then I saw that the blood was coming out the zip of her wingsuit. And I thought, well, at this point, this could potentially be like an open fracture or something. And she looked back up. I said, look back up at the mountain. Do not look at your leg right now, because this could be pretty full on.
Welcome to The Freedom Project, a podcast for those who crave adventure with every fibre of their body. I'm on a mission to bring you absolute freedom. Yes, freedom to do what you want when you want to, but also freedom from your own limitations. In this podcast, I'm going to be exploring what it takes to live a life full of adventure and freedom. I'll be interviewing adventurers, explorers, and business owners who have set their life up to have an abundance of choice. And I'm also going to give you the high performance tips and tricks I teach my adventurepreneur clients to have the kind of life they want and be the type of person they wish they were. So if you're not already, subscribe to the show and settle in for another episode of The Freedom Project. Tim Howell is a base jumper, alpinist, and former Royal Marines Commando. Tim was the first person in the world to climb and then base jump all 6 of the Great North Faces of the Alps, and the first Brit to ski base jump. And in this podcast, we discuss Tim's key lessons from over 1,000 base jumps, how to dispel fear, why luck doesn't play a role in his safety, Tim's best failure, the highs and lows of base jumping and pursuing freedom, and lots more besides. I feel like in this hour-long conversation, you really get to know what makes Tim tick. And also there's a ton that you can apply to your life and your pursuit of freedom and adventure. And actually, I'm always impressed when someone counters that daredevil stereotype by providing very logical explanations and well thought out explanations of why he does what he does. So here is the wonderful Tim Howell. So man, let's start with an interesting question. Where did you meet your wife?
So I just finished a long deployment in the Royal Marines, and I had 2 months leave. So I thought this is a perfect time to get really current in wingsuiting and skydiving, and then from the drop zone I can take it straight to the to Monte Brento to take my wingsuit off the cliff for the first time. So during this training, I was in a drop zone in Madrid, and my wife worked as a wingsuit instructor at the weekends. And she had been told that there's a stupid Englishman leaving the plane and inflating his wingsuit, nearly hitting the tail of the plane with his head. So she was the first person to run over and debrief me. I suppose is a nice way of saying it. Saying, "Yeah, you nearly took down a plane." So yeah, that's how we met. And then we continued meeting each other in the mountains, whether it was Italy or Switzerland, and continuing our passion for base jumping at the weekends.
So is the base and wing community very tight-knit?
Yeah, I would say it is. And my example always is, no matter where I go in the world, or no matter what sort of adventure I've got my eye on, I can always reach out, and there'll always be people who could jump with me in whatever country in the world, some really random places, or there's always people willing to give me information.
Yeah. So I was doing a little bit of research into you and prepping for this conversation. And did I get it right that there's an interesting story around when you proposed to her?
Yeah, that was yeah, Eva still says that was the best holiday she's ever been on, but it ended up with her being in surgery for a couple of hours and a night in the hospital. So
yeah, what happened?
Yeah, it was pretty full on. So it was a trip to South Africa, and we ended up on Table Mountain, where we both geared up in our wingsuits. I proposed, and we both flew away from the cliff doing a 2-way. And I saw that we weren't making as much forward progression, high glide to reach the landing area as I thought we would. So Eva pulled a parachute. She had line twists, and she landed downwind in this little scrub area that we hadn't really thought we were going to land on, so we didn't check it. And she cut her leg on a tree stump. Um, and I came running over, and she was like upset, annoyed, a little bit teary, but I thought nothing serious of it. And then I saw that the blood was coming out the zip of her wingsuit, and I thought, well, this at this point, this could potentially be like an open fracture or something, because I did see her land pretty hard. She acted as my windsock as well. I landed the opposite direction, perfect landing. Um, and
Good future wife
yeah,
duties.
exactly. Cheers, hon. And she looked back
Yeah.
up. I said, look back up at the mountain. Do not look at your leg right now because this could be pretty full on. And I unzipped it, and the flap of skin on her shin, pretty much like the size of my hand, just fell away from the bone. And it wasn't an open fracture, which was a huge relief. And she wasn't bleeding that much at all. So I bandaged it up with strips from my shirt. And because she wasn't in that much pain, and because she wasn't bleeding out, and she was happy to try and get to the car of her own accord, we spent the next 2 hours lifting and shifting back to the car. And then yeah, got to A&E. And yeah, some pretty serious plastic surgery, and some pretty good scrubbing of the wound later, because there was some, yeah, all sorts in there: dirt, grit, bits of sand, and yeah.
I bet. Makes my proposal look very tame. I thought it was cool. Revelstoke,
Oh,
skiing,
nice.
backcountry, all that kind of
But no
stuff. Like
accidents.
no
Well,
accidents. It's probably the way we'd both prefer it, but like
exactly. I
very
don't
tame.
think it's yeah.
It's not the one to go for.
Hmm.
So obviously, previous life experiences prepped you pretty well for that. Let's like, if we can, we'll lead up to that. But like, talk to me about where you grew up and like what kind of kid you were.
Yeah, I grew up in the south of England, always around the coast, but really grew up near Portsmouth, and then moved to like Somerset and Dorset in my later teens. And yeah, my dad was an ex paratrooper, so I think I had a pretty strict upbringing, and always kind of pushed me to the point as well where he really helped me understand risk and what I was capable of, but also having that trust in my abilities. He had that trust, which I then think pushed me to be able to trust my own abilities. Um, so yeah, it was definitely the upbringing that led me to where I am now.
What kind of stuff were you getting up to with them?
So I remember one example where we had a farmhouse which was 3 stories high, and there was scaffolding on each chimney. And I don't know how it came about, whether my dad decided I could do it or I could, but he was fine with me climbing up the scaffolding and then walking across the apex of the roof from one scaffolding to the other. And I think I was probably about 13 or something. Um, Mum was away at the time. I don't think it would have happened if she was about. But yeah, just things like that. Things like, the consequences are really, really high. But if you're sure that you can do it, and it is doable, like you can walk across a pavement without falling off. So why could you not do that 3 stories high? So yeah.
Good role model. Did you have any other role models in early life?
Um, no, I don't think I really did. And I look up to certain people, and I'm very reluctant to use the word inspire, because unless you know people really, really well, you only get to see a certain part of their life. So certain acts that people do inspire me for sure. I remember watching Shane McConkey, because I used to ski a lot, and he was definitely an inspiration. Uh, but I use that word very rarely.
Yeah, that's an interesting turn of events and like the full circuit of McConkey
Mm.
and having like we'll fill that loop in eventually. But like, when did you first start getting involved in climbing, involved in the mountains? Like, what was that journey like?
Yeah, so I had never really had a mentor for climbing or never did any courses. And for me, I much prefer that sort of avenue. Um, Learning as you go along, learning off friends, going full in depth on forums and, being immersed in the community. And I feel like that's a really good way of learning for certain sports, I would say.
Hmm.
So I started climbing probably when I was 14, 15. And to be honest, back then, all these things that I've done since, I genuinely would never have thought I'd be able to achieve. I never thought I went to Pakistan this year, and I never thought I'd be climbing 6,000 meter peaks in Pakistan on a self organized and self funded trip. So all of those things along the way, climbing the north face of the Eiger, or even going to Chamonix for the first time and climbing the most basic of routes. Each stage of my climbing career, I would never have thought that would happen all those years ago.
Mm. That's the kind of joy of the adventure, isn't it? Like what feels like a massive adventure to begin with
For
when you're
sure.
top roping something that's like look back at it and it's pretty
Yeah.
simple. It feels like a massive adventure. And then you push it 3% and then you push it another couple of percent. And then like you're doing things you're thinking, this is really cool shit, but it's just more of it down the line,
Yeah.
probably somewhere.
And I always say, no matter what it is each little adventure, or each, as you say, each time you push it by 3%, it's a stepping stone to the next one and the next one and the next one. It's all those skills and techniques and experience that helps you push it to that next stage.
Have there been times when you've made the mistake of not pushing 3% and pushed 300% and gone way too far?
With climbing, I wouldn't say so. With base jumping in the early days, there was one incident that I'd say, yeah, I pushed it. Because with skiing, back when I was skiing, or in my early years of skiing and climbing, and mountain biking, I think you can push it because maybe you're going to end up with broken collarbone or concussion. Um, but with base jumping, you can't push it in the same way. So I was lucky enough. Well, I wouldn't say I've got a lot to say about luck, but I was fortunate enough
Mm-hmm.
that I was able to walk away from that without any injuries, learned from it, and realized I cannot push this sport the same way that I'm pushing
Yeah,
it.
what happened?
So I decided to do an aerial, like a somersault off a cliff, without being competent in that maneuver at all. Um, and yeah, it ended badly. I hit the cliff under canopy, but managed to turn it around and land. But the canopy had a hole in it so big I could crawl through it. So it was, yeah, it ended all right.
Geez, so you land what somewhat safely, and
Quite
then what are you
hard
thinking
on
about then?
on the pebbles below.
Okay.
Unfortunately, there were pebbles, and pebbles I think can be better to land on than sand because sands can be so dense because there's no gaps.
Mm-hmm.
But when you land on pebbles, it all sorts of disperses, and it can be quite forgiving to land on.
Yeah. So you have you have a forgiving landing on
Yeah.
stones, and you think like what are you thinking to yourself?
As it was happening.
Yeah, like afterwards when you kind of,
Yeah,
I'm sure
afterwards.
when whilst it's happening, it's kind of like shit hits the
Yeah,
fan. I've got my
you react
processes.
to it.
I'm like switched on. But then afterwards, like what's going on?
Super annoyed with myself, just because I remember when I was mountain biking, I used to do a lot of free ride, so drops and
Mm-hmm.
road gaps and things like that. And I always used to think use pressure to fuel your motives. So it would be getting friends and getting hyped up and psyched. Yeah, let's
Mm-hmm.
go for it. But that is completely the opposite of what you want for base jumping. It needs to be 100% calm. Just react to anything that happens as opposed to having your head just filled with adrenaline and noise and rage. So yeah, I was just super annoyed with myself that I let that happen in this sort of risky and unforgiving environment. But I picked up the phone and bought a new canopy that afternoon, a new parachute, and was off to Europe for a month of base jumping. So get back on the horse.
Is that because you just had to get back on the horse and just like that it's going to become a thing if you don't get back on it?
Not so much. I mean, I do agree with that idea that you should get back on the horse, and that was the same for Eva after her wingsuit accident. 3 months later, she was back flying again. But it was just an incident. I knew how to improve it, and I was going to continue.
Yeah. So I want to come to this later, but seeing as you brought it up, we're going to jump in. You spoke about that calmness. How do you find that state?
So for me, finding that calmness is through. So there's a great military saying, knowledge dispels fear. And if you understand what everything involves, and you understand the procedures and the protocols, and you understand your own ability and skills, then everything should go as planned. Everything should go as it is. And I almost have a tick list. Like, am I capable of doing this jump? Do the numbers add up? Have I packed my parachute correctly? And if I've done everything I can do to mitigate the risk, then am I going to do it or not? And if I'm going to do it, then I might as well be in the understanding that everything's going to go well. And if it doesn't, I can react to it with a calm mind.
Nice. With that knowledge dispels fear. What's your? Is there a Dunning-Kruger effect of
Huge.
Do you think that the arrogance
Massively.
really picks up? Because I can point back to me being going into avalanche train in the first couple of years of being in the mountains, and I took now what I know as stupid risks, but thought I was safe because everything had been fine until then. What's that like in the world?
I use the Dunning-Kruger effect, the graph, quite a bit when I teach base. And for me, that peak happens at almost everyone I know who's had a serious incident, 3 years. It happened for me at 3 years with that example of hitting the cliff. And it happened to a lot of my friends at 3 years, where you've survived 3 years without any real incident. So you're like, I'm invincible. You've got 3 years of experience, where 3 years is actually nothing. And then something happens, you push it too far. And then if you continue base jumping, you start to plateau. And you gain the experience, but you're not going to take any more risk than necessary. And that's finding that line is where you need to be.
What do you watch out for to know that you're in the danger zone?
That's an interesting question. I think knowing myself in high risk environments, I can pick up on certain things of whether I'm comfortable in that situation or not. And I'm not saying every jump is just a walk in a park. There are some jumps I'm standing at the edge and it's a new jump, that has never been done before, that's potentially quite technical. And I just need to reassess everything. I need to think, have I done all my calculations? Have I, is everything the way it should be? Have I packed my rig? And once I've done all that, then I should be able to carry it out with the utmost confidence.
Do you have a system from the moment you pack your canopy to the moment you land?
A system is in step by step
to either get you in the right headspace or to ensure that you've I'm sure there's SOPs this is how you pack, this is how you go through this process. But actually the more interesting point is you're standing at the top of the jump. what's your system for getting in that headspace? Like, are there checks you go through? Are there visualizations you go through? Is there any calming effects? Is there like a micro meditation up there?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I mean, I don't do this anymore, I would say, because after 1,000+ jumps, I've really started to do it naturally, I suppose. But there'll be times where maybe my friend has a bad exit or something, and I'm just like, oh, my heart rate goes up. He's absolutely fine, but it's still a little bit of realization that things can go wrong. And my heart rate goes, and I just do like box breathing, just to like really bring it back down, refocus, and go again.
Yeah, interesting stuff. So to jump all over the place, you grew up in the South Coast, then you went to, was it guiding in Africa?
Yeah, I lived in South Africa for 2 years.
What takes you there?
My mum was a purser for British Airways, so cabin crew. And the family had always loved South Africa, and my dad lived in, I think, Kenya for a few years in the military. So it was always a place that was yeah, always brought us back. Hence why I proposed there as well. But it was an amazing place. There's risk, and there's adventure to be had. So I decided it was a good place to spend a couple of years after my A levels.
Nice. And then what do you get from that experience? Like, what does that teach you?
So I really didn't know at that point where my life was going in terms of like career. It was a great 2 years to figure out where I wanted to continue this avenue of taking risk and like mitigating it and being independent. And eventually, obviously, that led to being in the Royal Marines. But it was, yeah, I mean, being that young in a real hazardous environment. I was 19 with a 475 rifle, no, 458, taking clients amongst elephants and rhinos and buffaloes and lions and stuff. So it was, yeah, it was pretty full on, and I think that really helped me, being that young, for confidence and everything really.
Yeah, I bet. What's the training like to put you in a position where you're competent enough to?
Yeah, so
to
it was
guide?
a 6 month course. So everything from survival, weapon handling, vehicle, obviously everything to do with the animals and learning the ins and outs. And but yeah, it was an amazing course. And then I was fortunate enough to get a really good position in Sabi Sands, which is a private part of the Kruger Park, and that's where I did a couple of years of guiding.
Nice. And then you end up coming home. Is the Royal Marines always
It
the
wasn't
plan?
initially, but looking back, I kind of realized it was inevitable. Well, inevitable joining the military as it is.
Mhm.
And yeah, there were a few things that kind of finished my time in South Africa. Like Jacob Zuma just came into power, so made it harder to renew the visas.
Mm.
The recession hit in the UK or Europe, and getting tips from the clients were a lot harder or a lot smaller. So that made things different. And had a colleague of mine who decided to shoot his wife and then try and find me, and then shot himself. And I all thought, yeah, it's
Jeez.
probably time to go home. And then I knew my dad would be like, well, what you doing for work? What's your career choice? So I was like, the Marines. I'll join the Marines. So
Obvious question. Was there some conflict with your dad being an ex-para?
I mean,
And you decided to give him
yeah,
back?
no, my uncle is actually in the Marines, and I knew that if I was going to join the army, I'd try and go down the officer route. Um, but I would rather have joined them, and there was no conflict. To answer your question, there was none at all. To the fact that I got my dad a maroon coloured T-shirt that said something like "God was a para because he failed the bootnet course," so, and he wears that. He wears that. So.
Nice. Good stuff. So you like training. What was training like? Because that's quite a lot of. I suppose you've been through a 6 months of training to become a
Mm.
guide. I'm guessing pretty different to being down at Limpston. And you're also like going from quite a lot of freedom and self-expression if you're climbing, or kind of become out. It's outdoorsy, definitely, but having that, the freedom to do what you want when you want, I'm guessing is pretty high. To go to like 8.5 months down at Limpston, what's the shock of capture like for you?
It was, to be honest, between my dad bringing me up as a child, there were a lot of similarities of how I had to fold clothes
Yeah.
and clean shoes, and there wasn't much shock of capture. Uh,
Okay.
which is probably
You
the part of
fit
me
in.
saying why it was inevitable, because a lot of my childhood had
Yeah.
similarities.
Okay. So training wasn't so bad
It
then.
wasn't. Um, I I'm proud in saying I was an original, but for me, if you're even slightly switched on and you just crack on with the exercises with the fizz and do not give up, you're going to pass. So, and that's always what I felt and why I joined, because I was like, I will pass. It's a given, as long as I don't, put my foot in a cattle grid and break my leg or something, then I'll just carry on, and it'll be done.
There's definitely some truth there. There's a little bit of luck in there for
No,
sure,
so
which I think would
yeah,
negate to
so a
other luck.
situation where you could say is luck is friends of mine who put his leg in a cattle grid and broke it, or a friend of mine in a speed march who was in the speed march. There was a branch across the road. He missed it, tripped over, fell, broke his leg. He didn't pass out with us. That to me isn't unlucky. That's you not being switched on enough. Like everyone else missed that.
Mhm.
Out of 30 blokes, everyone else didn't do that. So where everyone else maybe has a fraction more energy, foresight, strength, mental aptitude, whatever it is, maybe they're a slightly bit more awake than you, whatever it is,
Mhm.
they didn't do that.
Mhm.
So that to me is just, yeah,
Yeah.
part of the game. You didn't manage to have the same level as everyone else.
Yeah.
That's me being
Yeah.
mean, but that's
There's
how I
this
see
guy.
it.
No, no. I'm with you. And there's this guy who did my commando course with, and um, he was the lightest man to like ever like ever go through that course. I swear. But he also like. You could see the fear when we went to do Tarzan assault course and went to do the old death slide, and he got his rope and just forgot to wet
Mm.
it on the way through. Jumped off, he just stuck and hung and hung and hung, and he was there. And then obviously training team were like, okay, trying to get him, like, what do you do in that situation? But he starts bouncing down. He's trying to like get himself down because time has started. There's one shot, and we were reservists as well, so it's like I've got this
Yeah.
opportunity. I have to do it now, otherwise I have to wait another year. And he fell, smashed his scapula, and like actually bent the barrel of his rifle around his
Holy.
spine, which is so lucky. But
Wow.
yeah, like that is the like you could say it's luck. He was super light. He had a ridiculous 5K time. Super fit, very switched on bloke for the rest of it. But like you see the fear got
Mm.
the better of him, and lovely bloke, like completely like genuine good guy. But yeah, the luck, the decisions you make, it's a
Yeah,
murky
it
middle ground.
is. I just think people use the phrase luck without and it's like obviously fine. I just like to look into things a bit deeper when people say things.
Mm.
And it's yeah, there's a lot of situations where people can use that phrase or actually it's not. Um, and it happens a lot
Mm-hmm.
with base jumping. I think I cannot think of a situation of an incident where somebody ends up hurting themselves or even a fatality where it has not come down to personal decision making. And if it comes down to decision making, then it's not luck anymore because you decided to do it or not. Whether that's misrigging or doing something out of your ability or whatever it is decision making.
Yeah, I was speaking to. Do you know Andy
Yes,
Torbeck?
yeah, I do. Yeah. Well, I don't know him personally,
Okay,
but we chat.
cave diver. Yeah, he was talking about. Okay, yeah, okay. So we were talking. I was talking to him on the podcast a couple of weeks back, and he was talking about
Mm,
cave diving, and he said he loves it because success is completely binary, and it's entirely down to the decisions you make. There's so few outside factors. It's just, did you
mm,
plan it correctly?
love it.
Did you go through your systems? And I'm sure there's more variables when you're kind of outside of water and you're in a kind of less
Mm,
controlled environment, but still, like, what
yeah,
are the
it's great.
controllable
Love it.
factors within that?
Yeah, really interesting.
Yeah. So was the decision to go down the mountain leader path, was that as inevitable as joining the Marines in the first place, or joining the military?
Yeah, maybe. Um, yeah, I can't actually think of when I first thought about it. I think I was always aware about the mountain leader branch. Um, but it's the type of thing that you say to the um the careers advisor, and they go, "Oh yeah, sure, mate. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, come back to me in 5 years' time or whatever." But yeah, I got the opportunity after Afghan to join the branch, and I passed the like 1 week course, or whatever it was, to start the training. And by then, I'd actually been pinged to be a clerk, and I just didn't turn up. And I think it was probably the first time in the Marines where I kind of like stood up for myself and said, "I'm not doing that. I'm not going on that clerk's course if I've got this ambition to be an ML." And I'm sure my life would have been very, very different because I would not have stayed in, Clark branch for more than I had to.
Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah. So we should probably give a quick definition of mountain leaders
Mm.
for the audience.
So it's also called cliff assault, or as part of the job of a mountain leader. And a mountain leader, the course is very tough. I definitely found it challenging. Um, and we often join recce troops, so it's a reconnaissance role, and it's probably one of the few roles or few branches in the Marines where you can continue being what we call a green soldier. You continue soldiering with your rifle. You're not driving. You're not being a clerk or a drill instructor or a chef or whatever. It's one of the few roles where you're still, you know, being on the ground and yeah, being a soldier. So it's definitely something I continue. I wanted to carry on being a soldier.
Mhm. Just a quick favour to ask. If you love the show and you think it may help someone else in the world, then head to wherever you listen to The Freedom Project and leave a 5-star review, and maybe even share it with some friends. It really does help me, and it helps the show too. I can continue to get fantastic guests on the show, it reaches more people, and it makes me feel great too. So I would be enormously grateful if you could leave a 5-star review and share any episodes of the podcast that you love. So it was the actual soldiering duty, and I suppose you could go, like, if you wanted to continue soldiering, you could go down the special forces route as well. But there was obviously something about the mountain leaders in particular that you're like, okay, that's engaging. I'm assuming the kind of the obvious thing that it's mountains and cliffs.
Yeah, I mean, most of the ML branch don't like climbing. It's just an opportunity for them to carry on being a soldier. But for me, I had so much interest still outside of the core in terms of base jumping and well, not skydiving at that point, but base jumping and climbing and mountaineering, that SF was never really a world that I wanted to join. I've taught quite a few friends of mine at SF how to base jump, and some of them managed to meet me every now and again for a climb. But that's their world. That's their life. Is the SF world. And even throughout training, where we'd get a long weekend, and lads would be making the most of relaxing with their girlfriends or whatever. I'd be on a flight to Italy and climbing up big walls. So it was always I always wanted my spare time, my free time, to carry out my goals and ambitions, which is ultimately why I left the Marines.
Yeah, that's quite interesting, because the phrase that you'll have heard a ton of times, but kind of civilians won't have heard as often, is the idea of being corpist, where people are just obsessed with their aspect in the military, or in this particular case, the Marines, and like that the whole life revolves around it. But you also wanted that distinction. You had that difference between you and the military.
Yeah, I did. Um, it wasn't to be not corpist. I mean, I wasn't corpist. I didn't have t-shirts at the weekend, or my room covered in flags or whatever. But it was more just like, I had bigger things going on as well. I've always thought that I'd do something in the Marines, such as passing out, doing my 36, 32 weeks of training, and then that would be the hardest thing in my life. And then I'd go climb the North Face of the Eiger, and that would be the hardest thing. And then so it was to and fro between my military career and what I was doing as a civilian. They were on par with how hard I was pushing myself, whether it's mentally or physically. Um, so yeah, it was just a different type of technical ability and hardship that I was putting myself through, whether it was in my own time or for work.
Cool. And talking about hardship, what's the ML course like?
So we were on an ML3 course, and we shadowed the ML2 course. So we did the well, pretty much the exact same as them, without the leadership part of it. So we would follow them for 3 months doing the same exercises. So like the mountain phase in Scotland was just ridiculously long yomps every day with ridiculously heavy Bergens, and then up all night planning the route for the next day, and that carried on for about a month or something. Then there was the climbing phase down in Cornwall. For me, that was pretty simple. We were getting lectures from some of the corporals, and I'd be tucking away at the back saying, "That's wrong, mate. You're talking rubbish." But it's a different type of climbing. It's combat climbing with boots and stuff, and it's just. But the climbing I felt relatively simple and pretty.
That must give you such an
For sure.
advantage to be able to not switch off, but to have like
Yeah,
a
yeah, not be worried about the climb the next
technique.
day and stuff like that. I was just like, yeah, I know it's going to be fine. And then a month in Dartmoor, which was the OP phase, which was pretty much being holed up in a dirty trench in the pouring rain for weeks and days and days and days, and it was very what's the right word for it? Yeah, it was abysmal. It was horrendously wet and tiring, and yeah. I think most of us remember
Sounds great.
that's just being in a wet hole. Like nothing is dry, and you're there for up to a week, and it was rubbish.
Yeah, that sounds disgusting. But it's the same conversation I seem to have with everyone. It's like the things that stand out, whether it's in the mountains or whether it's in training or any parts of your life, like the punctuation of the terrible moments and how you coped with it. That's what seems to stand out. Like there's this time where I was stuck on glacier and like crevasses in a lot of places, and big avalanche went off. It's probably 200 meters away from us, the edge of the avalanche. And we're like, oh shit. And we're currently going up and we're roped up at the same time. And I was just on frame bindings at the time. And we're like, we need to get down here right now. We need to get off this, need to figure it out. And my frame bindings got completely clumped up with snow, completely stuck. And the only way that I could like melt that was just to piss on them. So there's this avalanche that happened down there. It was freezing cold. Like we didn't really know that much about glacier travel at the time. We're pretty scared of falling down a crevasse, and there's me pissing on my frame binding.
I was turning around like, "What are you doing, Tom? Why are you having a piss at this time?"
Yeah, exactly. Got more important things to be doing. But like those are the things. Like it was funny, but also like it was scary, and those are the things that seem to stand out from events like that.
I mean, that's why newspapers publish a bunch of horrible stuff instead of lovely stuff.
Talking to you about getting out in the military? Like, where do you go with that? Like, what's the like? Is that an exciting part of the journey? Is it disorientating?
I mean, I left before I resented it. I didn't want to get to the point where like I needed to be out in the next month. I was going to pull my hair out, so I left at a good time, and I knew I'd need a plan. So I was I always had a plan in the back of my mind, but it was still a little bit worrying. I had a mortgage, and my whole point of leaving was so I could be self-employed and do what I wanted when I wanted. So it was probably about 3 years of doing rope access work here and there, some work offshore before I could finally build up enough contacts and contracts and to be able to do this full time. Mountaineering and alpinism and base jumping and working with brands as my full time job. So yeah, the last 2 or 3 years has pretty much solidly just been that side of things, mixed in with a few other little jobs that I want to do. But I do them because I want to do them rather than I have to.
What's that process like of, because you're essentially
Hmm.
starting a business at that point where you're thinking about, I'm marketing
Yeah.
myself, I'm doing sales, I'm producing content, I'm delivering
Hmm.
products in terms of videos and articles. Like, what's the process like of that startup mentality for you?
Um, so I've seen other people do it before, and the gift of the gab really helps. But I wanted what I do to speak for itself. So I wanted, what I was doing to really stand out, and that's not what I'm motivated by. Is making it work as a job. I'm motivated by doing these things, these goals that will really challenge me, and most of these goals and ambitions are things that had never been done before, and they stood out in that way. Um, but yeah, it was. I never wanted to be called a sellout or to see myself as a sellout. So there's definitely certain things I'll say no to, and certain things I have to think carefully about. But yeah, it's worked out.
What are the two paths you're offered? Because like there's the sellout path. What does that look like in terms of the decisions you make? Is it like, okay, anything for a quick buck, and like what are the opportunities
Yeah, I
associated with
think
that?
selling out is when you have certain ethics or morals that can be bought. You know, if I was told, would you support this product for this amount of money? And previously I'd said, that brand is absolutely rubbish. I'd never wear that. And now I'm doing it because of a little bit of money. Then that's selling out in my eyes. Um, so yeah,
When do those opportunities start to present themselves to you? Because like I'm imagining there's a lot of people who are interested in doing the thing that you do or a similar version of it, but don't get there or half-ass it along the way.
yeah. I mean, they've presented themselves to me even since when I was in the Corps. Certain TV shows or certain brands or whatever it was. But it's not one of those things where you can just say like I want to do that for a living. You've got to be living it already to then I think jump in it on any opportunities that come. Um, so I've got yeah, when people just say how do you get sponsored, you can give a brief sort of outline of how it works, but it's not a step by step guide of how to guarantee sponsorship. Uh,
Yeah. Do you have a like so I'm very unfamiliar with the world of base jumping, other than I know what it is. Like, do you have like a, I don't know, like a USP, like a unique selling point? Like people know Tim
mm.
as this kind of base jump who does this
Yeah,
kind
for
of
sure.
things.
I think my nicheness comes from combining alpinism and mountaineering with base jumping. So that's enabled me to access a lot of jumps that a lot of other people can't. And really combine them to create these unique opportunities in some high mountain ranges around the world.
Hmm. Got you. Got you. What do actually? There's so many places that I want to go for this. Like, what's the price you pay for a lifestyle where you, or for pursuing a
Yeah.
career where it's your lifestyle at the same time, and also one that is in the mountains and outdoors and very unconventional?
Um, so I think a lot of people straight off think, you must be rich, or have rich parents, or been handed everything on a silver platter. But I mean, even the example I gave earlier, when during training in the Royal Marines, I'd nip off for weekends. I'd be using ration packs that I took from work. I'll be using sleeping bags that I took from work. I'll be sleeping in laybys. And to this day, you know, how many ever years later that is, that's like 12 years later or more. It was my birthday the other day. I slept in a lay-by just so I could get up and do a jump the next morning. So it's a lot of sacrifice, but I don't look at it like sacrifice. It's just, it enables me to do what I do. And if I save money on one trip by not sleeping in hotels, then it means I can go on another trip the next month. Um, and even learning to skydive, I was fortunate where a lot of the skydives were compensated, or I did a lot of military or skydiving on behalf of the Royal Marines. Um, but I would pack rigs for money that would then also fund my jump tickets. So it's not just given to me on a silver platter. It's all hard work and dedication that gets you there in the end.
Yeah. When did you get the idea to climb and base jump all six of the Great
So
North
I
Faces of the
just
Alps?
started base jumping, and I went to a famous town called Lauterbrunnen. Um, and a friend of mine, this was during the same leave period that I met my wife to be, Eva. Um, and we
Profitable leave
and
period.
we went to climb the north face of the Eiger with a friend of mine from school. And when we were climbing it, I could see the mushroom, which is this detached pillar of rock from the north face. And I thought, well, I could climb this, and then I could jump it as well. And I got thinking about the other six north faces of the Alps, and realized one by one they were all possible to jump. So yeah, it just became a 7 year endeavor to try and climb and jump them all.
When did it become a serious thing where you're like, this is something I'm doing? Was it at that moment?
Yeah, I think pretty shortly after that, I think I climbed two of the North Faces in 1 year, and then they started slowing down. So pretty much as soon as I was on the next one, I realized, this is happening. I've started this 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 idea, and now I'm definitely going to finish it sooner or later.
Yeah. When was that?
I had just finished a 6 month deployment, and that I had 2 years left, so that was probably about 8 years ago. 8 or 9 years ago, I started.
Okay.
But I was still serving, so it was really hard to try and find the time and the partners and the conditions. If you got 2 weeks leave given to you on these dates, and I keep my fingers crossed that the mountain's going to be in condition for those 2 weeks, then yeah, you don't have a lot of
Mm.
flexibility. Yeah,
It's a pretty big risk. Or like not risk, it's just like
yeah,
the
yeah, exactly.
likelihood of things aligning is pretty small. And then how does that lead to Aconcagua?
So things just got bigger and bigger, and jumped Mount Kenya, and was the first person to jump in Vietnam, and the first person to jump in the UK. Um, and then yeah, I just really looked to something bigger. We tried an expedition to jump Kilimanjaro, um, and unfortunately the weather wasn't on our side to jump it. But then I thought, oh, I've done the six North Faces. Is it possible to do the seven summits? Um, So yeah, kind of it's a way. It's a lot less. It's a lot more looser. It's just a you know see what happens sort of thing. I'm definitely not dedicating all my time to try and jump the seven summits for various reasons. But
Yeah. Yeah, I get you. So what's the process of Aconcagua? Like how'd you get there? Like what's the like
hmm.
the even the journey?
So Aconcagua was like 2 or 3 years in the making, mainly COVID, and then finally it all opened up and they allowed tourists in with a cheaper permit because they were trying to get people back after COVID. So it kind of all made sense. We wanted to do a lesser known route called the Polish Glacier. So it took us about 8 days to get to Camp 2 on the Polish Glacier. A couple of days of hiking to base camp, then a rest day, then a acclimatization day, then to Camp 1, then to Camp 2. And then we tried to summit from Camp 2, but the weather was pretty full on conditions. But the next day we woke up and we were running out of supplies at this time, mainly food. And we woke up and the weather was absolutely perfect. But we knew that if we pushed for a summit attempt, that we would have to come back down to the camp and we wouldn't have any food left. So we opted for jumping. So that would mean that the team, my wife and my friend Jimmy, could meet me back at base camp, and I could fly down, and we'd be back at base camp with all the food that we needed. So yeah, we were Camp 2 was only about 100 meters away from the exit point, and I had recce'd it the day before, so I knew exactly what to expect and where to fly and how to get to the exit point and all the measurements and landing options. So the day of the jump, it was good to go. There wasn't that much to worry about or think about. The weather was spot on, so yeah, it went really smoothly.
What's different about jumping at that kind of
Yeah,
altitude?
quite a bit of different things to think about. First of all, the gear that you need, like what sort of kit you jump down with, because I landed on a glacier, so I'd need crampons and axes and gloves. Um, the altitude itself, there's 60% less oxygen at that altitude. So the wingsuit takes more time to inflate and pressurize. But also, once it is flying, it flies a lot faster. So I didn't realize how fast I was flying. And I normally fly at about 180 kilometers an hour. And on this jump, it was at 220 without even trying. Like I thought I was just chilling in the sky, but it was fast when I look back at the GPS data.
Wow.
So yeah, also just getting ready. Like it was hard work at that altitude, just putting the gear on and bending over to clear the snow off the exit point. I was out of breath and just really trying to get everything back down to yeah to be normal
Mm.
levels and normal breathing, ready to jump.
Yeah, I think I read somewhere that you kind of struggled finding the confidence at that moment. I might have completely misread it. I might have found it from somewhere that wasn't there.
Yeah,
But like,
no,
does that
it
ring a
wasn't
bell?
so much confidence. It might have been the phrase that my wife said, and she said, "Only jump if you're 100% sure." And my wife was there on the exit point. She didn't jump with me, but a lot of these times, I think about if everyone else is confident, it's nice to be able to ring ideas off other people. And my wife being experienced as well, she was pretty happy, and I think she's even said since like I didn't have to worry at all because everything checked up. It was like it was perfect for it. But she was like, yeah, only jump if you're sure, and if you're sure, go for it. So yeah, it was all good
Yeah, I know you and your wife obviously jumped a lot. Is it different jumping with your wife there
for
to
sure.
not having her there?
100%, very different. She's actually stopped
How so?
wingsuiting now. Not after the accident, well, it was years after the accident, but she kind of just fell out of love with it. And she always says that unless you're really, really involved and loving it every moment of it, there's no point doing it because there's so much risk involved. Then why would you do something that you're just doing for the sake of it? And it's definitely, I've felt a lot of relief since she's stopped jumping. So we spend more time in the mountains climbing now, which is great.
Nice. A relief because you know that she's not exposing herself to that risk.
I mean, there are definitely some types of jumping that isn't sustainable. And I would never say that the sort of jumping she was doing isn't sustainable. But, well, I mean, to a degree, you're taking risks. So, sooner or later, statistically, something can happen. But, but yeah, I'm happy she's not taking as much risk as she used to.
Yeah, there's. Have you read the book "Staying Alive in Avalanche"?
I'll write that down.
I can't remember the author. Yes, fantastic. It's heavy and complex and scientific, but it's very good. And I think it's in the first chapter, and I can't remember the stats at all. But he's just giving the kind of, if you go out into avalanche terrain this so many times, this is when it gets to 100% certainty that you will be caught in an avalanche at some point, and it's not that much. It's like, it's less than you'd expect. You don't have to be born in the Alps and live in the Alps and spend however many adventures every single season to get in it. It's like, it's fairly consistent and it's fairly kind of a low barrier to entry. So I'm guessing it's a similar kind of situation with base jumping, where it's like you do a certain number of jumps and then something percentage-wise is guaranteed.
Yeah, and I don't know what number that is. And, I've done 1,000 jumps, and although I've had incidents, I've never injured myself. So, they're definitely.
So some people do injure themselves very quickly, and some people get into horrendous situations, like without me.
I don't believe in that either, mate. So you can go for it. You can tempt as much fate as you want.
Okay, great, sweet. I'll tempt as much fate as I want then. Why? Why haven't
down to decision making? Like, I don't feel the need to push it that often. So I did an event the other day where people were jumping 20 times a day, and my friend and I were like, "Yeah, 4's cool." Did 4 jumps. We flew halfway around the world, and we did 4 jumps a day when people were doing 20. And I just don't need to. I feel the need to push it. I think I can read myself quite well and know my abilities, which is really important. And my other background, the military side of things and the climbing side of things, definitely helps me in terms of experience, to really judge things in these risky environments.
Yeah. What makes a good decision?
I think it's all touching on it just now, just understanding yourself, understanding why you're making the decision. Is it because of ego or lack of knowledge, or have you got pressure for some reason? That's really important. I think that's a big thing about it. Like, why are you making that decision, whether it's for or against? And then really understanding, is your experience, are you just leaping into the deep end, or have you built up that experience and now you can leap into the deep end because you've got everything from the shallow end to the deep end. You've got the whole length of the swimming pool of experience and not just straight in.
I really like that data point. There's this entrepreneur who's providing a stupid amount of value to the business world at the moment, called Alex Hormozy, and he talks about building an undeniable stack of proof that you are who you say you are. And like, that slightly relates to self-confidence, but also relates to decision making. It's like, if you know that you've made this decision correctly 1,000 times, that obviously goes some way to build the reference.
I think there's something to be said about confidence as well. Like, you need confidence, but why have you got that confidence? And knowing yourself, are you being overconfident? Because just confidence alone doesn't do much. You could be delusional and have all the confidence in the world. That's not going to do it. You need to be confident in your decision making, but that needs to come from somewhere. And I would say that overconfidence kills. It's too much confidence in the wrong place is is can be dangerous.
Do you have a journal or a notepad or a way of like tracking your jumps
Yeah,
and successes and
yeah. I love a good
mistakes
journal.
and things that you change?
Um,
What does that look like? What are the things that you track? What are the things that you like kind of have tracked and
yeah.
you realize weren't important?
So for base jumping, it's more of a logbook than a journal. Literally just like numbered 1 to 1020. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and every now and again, I'll write something in it that's important to that jump, whether it was an incident or something like that. But to be honest, I don't really need the logbook to remind me of those things. They're normally so poignant that I will remember them and learn from them. You know, just like that jump 7 years ago where I hit the cliff. That was so poignant and referenced the Dunning Kruger model, and it stuck with me ever
Mm.
since.
Yeah. So obviously that was a failure, maybe, like in terms of how you
Yeah,
operated or decisions you
I would
made, or
blame my
especially the
ego at that
outcome.
moment because there was quite
Like
a few
what? Go on,
people
sorry.
watching, pressure of people watching, doing that sheep mentality, just jumping because everyone else is, and doing these flips, and definitely overconfidence in my ability because I used to be quite good on the trampoline and thinking, yeah, flip's a flip, it's fine, I can rattle them off on a trampoline, no dramas.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was overconfidence in that respect because this is complete. Although the trampolining helps, it's a completely different environment. Um, so it was overconfidence in that way as well.
What other failures have been like your best failures? I'm a big proponent of the idea that like
Hmm.
failure is the thing that teaches you. So like what other failures have been the most useful
Yeah,
ones in your
that
life?
that was definitely a failure that helped. Um, there have been other ones, smaller ones that have been more helpful in terms of really technical types of wingsuiting and base jumping. But I also think that, sorry, I'd forgotten where I was going with that. Yeah, lots of small little things of failure that just helps me improve where I'm taking my
Mm-hmm.
wingsuiting, and I think almost every single jump I'll learn something from, whether it's the smallest thing or something that could potentially save my life. Like and even jumping with other people, I can learn from them and pass on that knowledge because it might not be a mistake that I would make, but teaching base jumping as well, it's something that I can pass on to students because they might make that mistake.
What are the small things that are the big things in base jumping? Like, I'm sure there's kind of little details. There's this example of in Vietnam, they figured out that things went downhill with discipline as soon as blokes stopped shaving because it was a small
Mm.
thing that led on to a big thing. It's like, what are the equivalents in
Hmm.
base jumping?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think attitude has a lot to play, um, especially when you get more and more into it and more technical. Um, just little, like almost little phrases and little ways about how people are acting makes me think I don't want to jump with them because they would potentially be the sort of thing that could lead on to an incident, and I don't want to be around that. So, I'm quite fortunate in that way. I haven't been around too many serious base jumping incidents. Because I don't jump with that many different people, and the people I do jump with, I really trust.
Yeah. You said I think I can't remember whether I heard it or read it. You said something along the lines of, "There's no one saying you shouldn't be doing that because you
Mm.
don't have the right sticker in your logbook." Um, what do you like? Why is that so
So
important for you
skydiving
in
is
your base?
really really controlled. It's really regulated. There's governing bodies all around the world, um, and most of those rules come down to the lowest common denominator. So if a guy is only able to do something with 500 jumps of experience, they'll say you need that sticker in your logbook to be able to wingsuit or whatever it is. Whereas base jumping, it comes down to very much like mountaineering and alpinism. It comes down to your own ability and your own judgment. And if you're not capable of doing it, the results can be really, really risky and detrimental. So it's again down to yourself, being true with yourself. Am I ready for this? Can I do it? Because at the end of the day, there's no one telling me I can't. It's just down to whether I have enough self-awareness that I'm going to outlive it. So yeah, it's all down to decision making. You gotta get it right.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting stuff. What's your next objective, or
Yeah,
what's on
so
the
there's
list of
quite a
objectives?
few other countries that I've got my eye on. That I want to do the first wingsuit jump. Um, this year has been a lot about climbing and getting stronger and fitter. So I want to just push my grade a little bit, and then back to the bigger mountains next year. Hopefully with hopefully a really really big objective. Um, yeah, out in the big mountains.
Nice. Sweet. Do you know what that is
Yeah,
yet, or are you
keeping
keeping
that a little
things
bit
open?
open for now. Nailing down the ins and outs of it, but yeah, fingers crossed.
Mhm. And is there anything that you just won't do? Is there anything you're like, that is um, an
I
unnecessary
mean, the
risk?
general grand scheme of things, yeah, I'm sure there's quite a few things I won't do, but like
Hmm.
I think there's quite a few people who set themselves rules in base jumping. They say, I will never do that sort of jump, or I'll never do that sort of jump.
Hmm.
And I don't have any things like that because I think if you train hard enough for it and are capable of pulling it off, then you can mitigate the risk. I think repeating it again and again is a different matter because then again that might become less sustainable.
Mm.
But no, there's nothing that comes to mind that says I will not do that. Um,
Got you. And then this is the most newbie
yeah,
question ever.
exactly.
So I saved it to last, where I can always cut it out if I don't want it in there. Talk to me about the
Oh, that
logic
always
of
comes
wearing a
up.
helmet while space jumping.
Um,
Is it because you
no,
just
not at
have it
all.
with you
No,
because you're
the
climbing up,
landing.
or is it something else?
Yeah, and I've
Okay,
put
so
a
you
dent
might
in a
fall
helmet
and knock your head.
from landing.
Sweet.
Fell over, and then there was a boulder right in front of me, and I just headbutted the boulder. Friends of mine have definitely been saved by helmets.
Yeah.
The joke is that you need a helmet to carry a camera,
Okay.
but it's a lot more than that as well.
Thank you. Thanks for clearing that up. Where can people find out more about you? Where can people follow your
Yeah, so
work?
most of my
Check out
videos are on
videos,
my
that kind of thing.
Facebook page, Tim Howell Adventure, and then same for Instagram, and then my website as well, timhowadventure.com, which is mainly just articles and thinking in depth about certain issues and certain trips and stuff. So yeah, thank you very much,
Perfect.
Tom. Cheers for having
Thank you
me.
so much for joining me.